Afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you all making time in your schedules to jump on today, have some dialogue and some conversation. As things have been shifting and conversations have been happening, thought it was imperative to pull folks together, kind of make sure I bring everybody up to speed, and then have some conversation about some plans and conversation moving forward. I do see that Patrice is on the call, and don't want to put you on the spot, Patrice, but I was going to give my understanding of everything that has happened in the conversations, but I didn't know if maybe you wanted to maybe share that. Again, I'm putting you on the spot.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Darren, you are putting me on the spot. I was just going to be in the background. But good evening. I was trying to find Marla's agenda, and so I'm assuming me being put on the spot is reference to housing NOLA. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah.
And so essentially, where we are, where the city council is in general, is in an overly anxious state of building affordable housing. I think that hearing the community's voices and citizens and people, and understanding the need of where we are around affordable housing, there is an urgency for shovel-ready, build now opportunities. I think they're seeing housing, and not to the fault of this committee or to Marla or anyone, our internal processes delayed the execution of that contract. So it was not even fully executed probably a month ago or so. And because of that delay, from the time that City Council approved and authorized the NOLA, housing NOLA contract, there was an expectation that there would be some evidence of results from having the contract in place and maybe some work from the committee. I don't think that the City Council understood kind of the long-term opportunities and how this committee was going to parallel the work of housing NOLA with the work of this Affordable Housing Coalition Committee. And so I know you all were going to use it to inform your work, but I think the council, because of the delay in it being executed, there not being any results, and then the pressure from the community to make some things happen now, they requested to put a pause on the housing NOLA contract. Internally, we didn't know what a pause meant. One of our assistant attorneys suggested a 6-month pause to kind of revisit where we are around affordable housing. So, you know, the city has some city-owned parcels. There are developers in the housing development space that have been knocking on our doors, have applied for 4%, 9% tax credits, and then we also have choice neighborhoods that's in the pipe that the city has heavily subsidized in many ways and used up quite a bit of our resources. I know that we have pretty much funded or supported those efforts up to about phase 3. They even advocated for a supplemental grant that we did receive when we were in DC. It's not even close to enough. There's still a $46 million gap, and the city does feel some responsibility in ensuring that all 5-6 phases is done for choice neighborhoods. So I do know one council member is really concerned about that. But also there are some developers who are interested in building now, and what type of gap financing does the city commit to that? So we do have ARPA funding. We've got 30 million, 10 of which is earmarked from the state, this purely ARPA funding. There's a time clock on that $10 million. And then we have our local 20 million. We're considering ARPA, but we've kind of watched it. So we've got a little bit of time on that. So I don't know where the coalition stands as it relates to us pausing the housing NOLA contract and how that impacts your work and what you all intend to do. I understand that is more of a long-term planning process that Housing NOLA has proposed. I know that is necessary and it is important, kind of thinking out the future, how we look to develop affordable housing in the community, and how do we engage the community in that process, and how do we leverage additional dollars is critical. But then there's just right now, collectively, this appetite for what can we do right now, around affordable housing. So that's kind of where we are. The city manager sent the mayor and the council, an email about pausing it. He's reached out to see if anybody had any issues with that, and no one does. And they've really weighed in about moving forward with something now. Is that everything? Any questions about that?
Does the pause? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Thanks for that overview. Just curious, when we talk about being able to move forward with projects now, does this mean that the funds are being reallocated to move those projects forward? Just curious how pausing this helps move projects forward now. I wanted to make that connection.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question, Ryan. It doesn't directly impact it. What it does do, though, I think there is some intention to take the allocated funding that we have for Housing NOLA, which is $300,000, to use that to provide some right now gap financing to developers who are ready to build now. That we could reallocate some of those resources. It's just the fear that tying it up to a longer term plan, like I said, I understand it's necessary and it is important work. There is just this urgency of right now. And obviously, if you just pause a contract, I don't think we can essentially free up the money, right? I mean, we have to keep it earmarked for the contract. If you cancel the contract, yes, we now have freed up resources that we could use right now. So I think the council just wants to see some immediate action. And then in 6 months, which is an internal number, we would revisit the appetite for the city council to move forward. What I will also just say, I mean, I'm just transparent and just telling you everything that I know about all of this. Some reporters and some community people have been on the council's back about the concept of another study. Now, I know that this is not a study per se, but there is a perception that we have had numerous housing studies done. We've invested in so many studies and research around affordable housing, and that Housing NOLA, in their mind, and like I said, I realize that's not what this is, appears to be another study. And there's been some articles written about it. There's been some pushback. And so they're saying, how many studies does it take to really move the needle on affordable housing when it's such a issue? And so that's just another perception about what this is. Now, council supported this. They voted on it. I think it was 2 that voted against it for various reasons. But now the rest of the council is looking at it in a different way because of some external pressures around affordable housing and our studies that have been conducted already.
So I have a question. I think that, so my understanding is that Housing NOLA is a plan that engages the community, though it might be a little further out. But the $300,000 allocated for Housing NOLA, if that needs to be used for shovel-ready projects, what will the $30 million be used for?
also for that. I mean, it's expensive. The sweet spot of the council is about $35,000 a door to support the building of new affordable housing units. That is an arbitrary kind of number that mainly one council member has kind of come up with in terms of what's the sweet spot. Obviously for choice, we're 6 figures per door at this point. There's a Peters Creek initiative. We were higher than $35,000 per door. But if we really focus on the mayor's charge of 750 units per year, we could essentially use up that money really fast. So to answer your question, Paula, yes, the 30 million is for affordable housing. That 300,000 would be just a drop in the bucket.
Drop in the bucket.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So why does it have to be either or? Why can't it be and?
Yeah, I think it can be. Obviously, it can be. You got your short-term immediate goals that can be happening now, and then you have your long-term planning process to engage the community and leverage additional dollars, right? And so, yes, that can be. Once again, it's just a perception, I believe, at the moment. There's perception, there's pressure, the perception of we have enough studies. And like I said, this is not a study, so I don't want to argue that point per se. There's a perception that it is, and we're funding something else to engage us in a process to build affordable housing when, you know, some council members say, we have the knowledge. One in particular said, I can call up some investors to help leverage some of this funding right now, or we can go to the foundations. Why are we using a company from New Orleans to tell us how to leverage resources here in Winston-Salem? I'm just giving you examples of some of the conversation that's happening around this particular contract. And I don't think there's appetite to cancel it. I don't know what Housing NOLA it will be feeling about pausing any work. You know, either we move forward with them, in my opinion, or they may want to move on. And so I know Marla, I think, has reached out to them about it. But either way, it really is just they want to pause it to see what we can do right now. How do we spend our energy and time, our resources, and what we have available now? How do we attempt to leverage additional dollars with the talent that we have on this committee, the resources we have on our city council to start moving the needle forward? So they just don't want to spend energy on community engagement and more research and a process that they know will take some time. Long term, it's a good thing, but immediate, they're not feeling it at the moment. Doesn't mean that they won't shift in several months. I think it's just they feel good about pausing it. Let's reset. Let's think about what we can do now.
So one more question from me, and that is the shovel-ready projects that you speak of, are they all affordable housing projects?
Well, I don't, Marla and her team have projects that they call in the pipeline, right? Every project, it takes some time with the developer, environmental reviews, whatever. But yes, the intent for everything city owned right now and this housing resources is for affordable housing. Absolutely.
Paul, were you about to say something? Your audio doesn't fit. No. Paul's trying to get his audio working. Any other questions or comments from coalition members to Patrice? And Patrice, I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. I know I did.
You did, but it's okay. I forgive you.
Paula has. I lied. I do have one more question, and that is, how are we defining affordable housing in that context with those shovel-ready projects?
Mm-hmm. So probably one of the reasons it's taken us even so long to get to this point is the development of our affordable housing policies and our housing justice policies, which are good. And it gives developers a clear direction on what our intentions are around affordability. And so having a mix is kind of best practice and is included in our affordability policy. And so it is well defined about the AMI and what the right mixture is. So it's not all below 30%, it's not all over 80%. You know, there's a sweet mixture of what affordability means. For single family units, you know, there will be a restrictive covenant of 15 years of affordability that is required. Developers understand that if it's multifamily, it has to be 30 years for affordable housing. And so it is written out in our housing policy about how affordability is defined.
I think Paul dropped his question in the chat. He says, in the conversation with council, have they articulated anything about what role they want the coalition to play in this process of getting immediate projects started?
Excellent question, Paul. I would say no. That would be my response. I don't know if they, like I said, I don't think they really understood the parallel track that the coalition had with the Housing NOLA contract and the proposed work of Housing NOLA, and how you all would be the supporting and implementing and engaging entity that would bring all of this to fruition. So I just don't think they understood that at the core, honestly, which means no, they don't have any ideas or input on the way forward for this coalition and how you all would play a role in supporting some immediate actions. Doesn't mean that we can't recalibrate and come up with a strategy. That would be Marla and her team. How does their work support the work of this Affordable Housing Coalition? So obviously, you know, some level of community engagement and wrapping people around our intent to get this done. I will say there's probably some already opportunities, but we're in a housing market where the costs have gone up drastically. So it's just a bad time, honestly. Cost of construction's gone up. And so, you know, we would need to leverage some private funding and resources to coincide with the resources that we have for affordable housing so we can get a bigger bang for our buck. So, you know, a coalition like this, they would rely on your connections and community partnerships and you know, who you know in the community that could support these shovel-ready potential efforts. And I use that word very broadly because obviously nothing's shovel-ready as it relates to housing per se, but there's a perception about what can we do right now. And so that has not been defined or scoped.
Yeah.
No, Paul, it's not working.
Oh, say something else again. Yeah, still not working there.
Patrice, you mentioned leveraging private capital. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm kind of understanding, is that in a context of each project, or is there some interest or ability to leverage either the ARPA dollars or the other funding in some type of a broader structure for private capital? Just curious what direction, you know, the council is interested in from that perspective.
Yeah, great question, Ryan. I don't think it's been thought through or scoped out per se. You know, the council would lean on the professional recommendations of our staff around what that can and should look like. And, you know, if there's a project at play, how do we support it? So I think a lot of what we've done recently is project based. And then you've got, so Peters Creek Initiative, for an example, with the old budget inn down there off of Academy and Peters Creek area, you know, they had a group, you know, they got together, they tried to raise certain funds. They have a developer that came to us with gap financing, more than what we would probably typical. But like I said, I think we're in a time where we'll probably, our cost per door is going to be higher on average going forward, just because of kind of where we are in the market. So I believe it's kind of been project specific. Doesn't mean it doesn't have to be that way. You know, Marla may have some ideas around collectively, how do we raise money or leverage additional dollars for this purpose? Do we set up a land trust or do some kind of land banking projects? Now, in addition to the Pauls and NOLA, you know, Marla is pursuing a land banking opportunity for the city, working with the School of Government. That has also been paused. So don't think that this is exclusive. All things that don't directly address the immediate need to build affordable housing, subsidize it in some way, is a no-go for the moment. But how we leverage the dollars, what type of projects we do, that hadn't been scoped out, but may be part of some of your work or kind of the work of our team internally.
So Patrice, so that I can understand the situation completely, has the work that we've been doing on Housing NOLA, that has prevented the shovel-ready projects from happening? Is that what?
I don't think so, Paula. Once again, it has nothing to do with Housing NOLA, doesn't have anything to do with this coalition. Once again, I think it's more about the perception that this is just another study and that there's some movement we could be making right now, that long-term planning is good, but we've got money right now, we've got land right now, we've got developers right now, and to go through another planning process or study, as they continue to reference it, just they don't have the appetite for it to invest additional dollars in another study, a company that's not probably Winston-Salem based. I know that gives a couple of them a little heartburn, even though the ones that are complaining about that did vote for it. But I think there's a collective, just literally, we need something right now. And that's what they're hearing from the community and the citizens, some of them, and some media, and people writing these articles about how many studies does it take to build a house. So that's literally it.
Patrice, I'll just interject, and again, just to Patrice is interpreting counsel, which is an amazingly hard thing to do. So again, to her, she's trying to interpret all that. But I will say there's two things, and then to come back to you, Paul, if you have one, and then Paul, I think your sound may be fixed over there. One, in the council members that I've spoken to, and I have a list of things here that I got from that I think may be helpful for us in terms of our conversation. I've cautioned expedience to them in the sense of, yeah, you want to do it, and you want to do it right, and you want to move forward, but doing things just for the sake of doing them, you can look back and say, well, we did it, it checked the box, but maybe it was not the best thing. So, you know, expedience is one thing, but in the midst of expedience, you do have to be cautious in the midst of what you're doing, just to check that box. And the other would just be to that point of like the impact of pausing this work, and how it does not impact the actual production. You know, you can be, unless there is a strategic plan of action already in place that's getting ready to be executed, you could end up in a place where you just have nothing. So if nothing has changed internally to move any progress forward, and you're pausing the other things, then nothing has really changed in order to actually jumpstart and move things forward. And maybe there's, you know, something happening that we're not aware of or moving forward to help do that, but there still needs to be something that would be helpful in, if it's going to pause this, what then are we going to do to jumpstart what may seem like the sticky wheels of government. And Paul, I think we hear you typing. So
I hear him typing, so he's working now.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So it's working. Okay. Well, all I wanted to say is I think the housing NOLA contract, yes, you're absolutely right. It was not to do another study. We've had a bunch of them. But what really attracted me to the idea of housing NOLA is they were going to actually put together an implementation strategy that was strategically oriented to this exact types of affordable housing that were most needed. And the other thing that I think was particularly interesting to me and I think helpful to the city is they were going to do a capacity analysis and capacity building, because with this 750 unit a year goal, which we're not anywhere close to producing, we need to be able to know ways that we can get the volume that is produced up as much as possible. And that's what I saw as attractive to what they were doing. So yeah, I mean, I realize, I feel like this can't be an either or thing. And I don't know that $300,000, the value of the contract, is going to make a huge difference if we're talking about the volume that we're doing. But losing the time to produce this implementation strategy, I think would have some significant costs for the city.
That's fair, Paul, and Darren, your comments. You're right, Darren. It's hard to translate collective desire, the council, but just hearing, and I'm trying to repeat a few comments that I've personally heard, just to the perception of kind of where we are. I do agree, as Paul has mentioned. I mean, can you do both? Yes. And is $300,000 going to make an impact or on our cost per door and the volume that's needed? Not likely. But once again, we serve at the will of our city council and our elected officials, and literally just trying to convey their desires at the moment. Darren has been an elected official. Paul has worked for the city. So you all intently know Paul is really close to city government. Obviously, the voices of committees like this are influential. And, if you have concerns about this, Paul, I mean, obviously, I can communicate that. You all can communicate it directly to the council members that you engage with clearly. But I think volume-wise, yeah, multi-family units is going to get us probably closer to that goal than single-family housing units. The other thing I would say is that there's been a few opportunities, and I don't know how the coalition can support this, but there is a community perception. Paul, you asked a question about what does affordable mean, and how are we defining that in some way? And there's some misinterpretation in the community about what that looks like. Community is saying, yeah, we need more affordable housing, but yet there was a recent opportunity for a developer in some property that we own, and we couldn't get it rezoned for housing, and the community came out in a rage. We don't want it here, right? We don't want that in our backyard. We don't want these neighbors who have affordable housing. And so our affordability, our what, 60, 80% of AMI, or below is teachers, it's law enforcement, it's firefighters, it's admin assistants. These are working people who need places that they can actually afford. The other thing I would say is the focus around affordable housing has been all about home ownership. And the trend and what the data shows is a lot of people don't even desire that. And they just want a decent and affordable, safe place to stay right now within their means. And so rental has come to the forefront in some way, and rental opportunities. And so I think that's something just to consider when we say affordable housing. Is it home ownership, or is it affordable, safe, decent housing that may be a rental option? So I know there are a couple of groups that have said that they're exploring that as another means of affordability. So I'm just throwing it out.
Appreciate that, Patrice. And again, I owe you a steak. Just want to, as we think about what we've heard, we think about the conversation, where we are, and actually, let me see. I think Paul just dropped something else in the chat.
That was just summarizing what I said before.
Okay, got it. You know, I've had multiple conversations with members of the council, some who've been in some of these conversations, and as I narrowed down, kind of trying to understand what we're dealing with, what is there. To Patrice's point, you know, their council is a political body, which is moved by political winds, and that's just the reality of it. And so, if there's pressure coming from the council to the council in certain areas, the council reacts to that pressure. And I think that what we're dealing with right now is a reaction to that pressure coming from multiple places. But what I haven't heard from across the board is we don't need any of the information and content that Housing NOLA was looking to do. What I feel like I've heard is a sense is there a way for us to get that done more quickly and get that done within resources within our community? That's kind of what I kind of received when I was hearing and talking with folks. And I'd say some of that, I think, but all of it, I think, I'm not sure, because that was the reason why we went out and were able to pull in Housing NOLA to do some of that work. But then I also believe that there's opportunity for us to connect with some of those groups that are putting the pressure. Actually having one conversation, one of the council members who've been engaged in conversation, they thought that would be very helpful in terms of the coalition being able to sit down, which we were getting ready to do. That was our next step, was getting ready to pull groups together and start sitting down and having conversation. I got a list of things I want to throw out there to the group on kind of actions, things we can do. We can go off of them and see how we want to reflect on each of them. But the first is maybe putting together some collective letter to the council, showcasing and sharing our perspective, concerns, issues, whatever it is with this. But then also looking at continuing to do the work and what that looks like. That kicks a question though to maybe Patrice and the council, because it's probably a council question, because if we continue to do some of the work that I think we need to do, there's a question of support of the Affordable Housing Coalition to do it, meaning staffing. What does it look like to have folks that really are there to do it? We're going to continue to engage. If it means we're going to lean into some community conversations to pull some of these developers and groups together to actually have dialogue, what does that actual support look like to be able to do that and continue to do that work, which is one of the things that I've heard. In particular, when I brought up one concern I've heard from a developer, such as the issues associated with tap fees. When they're building new construction and they happen to have the water tap fees and $15,000 per tap, that folks think that that's crazy. Well, how do we get folks together to actually talk about what a solution is to that and make a recommendation to council? That's time, staff time, and other things that they said that would be a good part of our work, but how does that actually get effectuated? How do we actually accomplish that? What tools are readily made available to the coalition to actually execute on being able to fulfill and pull that forward? The other is being able to be drawn into, and again, and Marla, your thoughts on some of these things I welcome too, just to around, what does it look like to be drawn into the conversations with developers and projects that come forward meaning the vetting process of those. There's proposals on building affordable housing. What we don't have right now today is a scorecard of sorts that is readily available to a developer who comes to the table and say, hey, they know if you go to the state and you apply for the 4 and 6% tax credit, you know what you're going to be rated on. You know what you're going to be scored on. Our existing process is it may not be as clear to folks outside of meeting the terms associated with certain funds. So if it's federal funds, you kind of know the base level of things you need to do, but we don't necessarily have a scorecard. Would that be something that council will be open to the coalition working with Marla and staff and team on, or maybe something that Marla and team already has handled? And then the last one here was in reference to being able to get unified and on the same page with some of those outside groups that have put pressure. The comment that I heard back is that if we were able to come back collectively with some of those groups, that there probably could be some change in sentiment in terms of how folks feel about pressing forward and moving forward on some stuff. There's multiple things there, throw them out there, and then we can come back kind of walking through just to see where folks are. But I just wanted to kind of put it all out there first, let it sit, marinate a little bit, and then kind of move forward. My first thing just about it all, I've said to everybody I talk to, I don't like it. I'm not a fan of where we are, but we're here, and how do we navigate forward becomes the question for me. So with the start of that question around collecting thoughts, drafting a letter, sending it out to the coalition. If folks can agree on that, we'd send that to the council just to summarize our thoughts. And then if we agree on any of these things that we may want to work on, we could potentially include that in there as something that we want to have to move forward. And you all may have totally different thoughts than what I just put out there, and open to that as well to open the conversation. But I just want to kind of put something out there for us to work from. So feedback, first part, collective thoughts, letter to council.
I like the idea. I think providing some thoughts back on, to Paul's point, what he provided, some clarification on why we took this path, and then also asking if this is not the path, then here's some other ideas, but provide us some direction, provide us some clarity on where we should be spending our time and going forward.
Yeah. I do think if they continue with this pause, one of the things I was looking forward to with Housing NOLA being immediately involved was this kickoff meeting, where the very people who may have been expressing these concerns to council members would be there, and Housing NOLA could give them the benefit of some of the data that they have put together that is more current than what was in these past studies, and talk about how this is the path to getting toward a more effective way of producing a higher volume of affordable housing. So I kind of saw that kickoff meeting as sort of doing, Derwin, what you were just explaining, is kind of hoping that people could, by listening to that and being part of that, they could then understand why this step was necessary. And none of this process should keep any projects that want to happen in the near future from happening. I mean, I don't see the Housing NOLA process as needing to put new projects on hold. They can keep going, but what this will do is help get more understanding about what types of projects would most effectively get us to our goals there. So kickoff meeting, I thought was very, very important to get that dialogue going.
Who was going to be included in the kickoff meeting?
I think Marla has a list of folks and groups that we've been thinking about over the last few months. She's been assembling that. So there was going to be a pretty wide invitation list sent to these folks. And I know people, some individuals who have gotten in touch with me, I've told them that there's going to be a kickoff meeting where that they should be participating in to kind of understand how this process will help move the needle.
And in particular, including folks like Folks for Good Housing, Housing Just Now, those folks were on the list of people as well. I know there's some ones who shared some questions and concerns. So, yeah.
And was Housing NOLA going to facilitate this and talk about the long-term process? Okay.
Yeah, they were going to make that part of the kickoff meeting, is explaining all that. So,
Darren, I like the collective approach, the unified approach, because I think that somehow we need to be on the same page. I can't see how being at odds on this critical issue for the community gets us anywhere. You know, so I think there has to be a meeting of the minds and, you know, see where we go. But Patrice, I did have one more question that when you were talking, how many shovel-ready projects are there?
That will be a Marla question. I mean, we have they have potential projects, what they call in the pipeline. But once again, that term shovel ready is a little broad in nature. We have some land, so there's all these things you have to go through before you're ready to shove the dirt. Like I said, there has to be environmental reviews. There has to be zoning. Does the land zoned for affordable, or not for affordable housing, but for housing in general? So that goes through the planning department. And so there's a few factors to be able to say what's immediate or not. The gap funding is a huge piece of that, and our council also isn't willing to give so much. They want these developers to raise the money. They want them to come to the table with a reasonable request on how much we subsidize their efforts and projects. So we've had developers, I mean, I've had meetings with them myself, and they have really good plans. It's just that the costs to build right now is just so high. But there are some locations that even land that we don't own, that we've been presented with, that would be for affordable housing. It's just that gap financing is so significant. We don't want to eat it up all in a couple of projects. So we need the ability to leverage additional dollars. We need developers to think through what are some other opportunities to raise money around affordable housing. We're not in a shortage of people on the list who would be ready to move in day one. But in terms of how many projects, I mean, that to define that, like I said, is a little broad, but there's all this potential. Right. I mean, we could probably list about 10 potentials that still would take time to develop it out, but we could move on a few projects pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly, like you talking months or?
Yeah.
So two things here, and so putting together, you know, collecting our thoughts, sending that forward to council. But what I also think is helpful, and I guess in the question again, I guess to go back to maybe a Marla question in reference to thoughts of being able to support it, and what would be needed to do so. Being able to, and maybe it's not the kickoff that we had envisioned of sorts in terms of that kind of meeting, but still putting together some kind of meeting, some kind of group collective of attempting to pull all these groups together that we've been talking about. I know, Paula, you've been in on the Folks for Good Housing meetings. I know the Housing Justice Now meetings, a couple other individual people who have been working in the space, but figuring out how we can facilitate having that dual process, sharing our thoughts, but pulling those folks into the room to say, hey, this is what we've been working on. What have you been working on? How do we collectively get on the same page about moving things forward? I think that should have somebody else outside facilitating that. And you know, just as a side of just, you know, having someone facilitate it, it would be helpful to make sure that, you know, conversation and dialogue happens. but I'm wondering whether or not internally we have what we need to even to put that on and to actually have that function well. And so that's a question I have, but I think it's something we should do, but it's a question on whether or not, without having Housing NOLA involved in that, whether or not we think we have the people and resources to do it.
If that's a question, who is that talking? I think we potentially could, and we would try to support any type of kickoff that you all have done. Paula and obviously Marla was at one of the fair and affordable housing lunches that one of my departments put on, human relations. They, I think, do it annually. It wasn't, even though we're a city department, they pulled in more non-city staff, and county was actually facilitating in some way. But there are some opportunities, you know, that's something the coalition wants to do. We'll be glad to support it in that way, you know, location or getting some staffs around that to support that type of thing. I like, Durham, what you were saying earlier about some of the kind of moving forward potential of the coalition and advocating. One of the things we had on our legislative priorities was around system development fees for the development of affordable housing. And so if that bill was enacted, it authorizes cities to exempt lots developed for affordable housing from stormwater development fees. So that's you know, there are some legislative policies that impact developers, and these fees and stormwater fees and things like that. We can waive those and make that easier for developers to build affordable housing. Those are some things that you know, a coalition like this could actually advocate for, and other things that limit developers from even wanting to be in the affordable housing space. So I think that's excellent. And you mentioned the scorecard. I know Marla and her staff have been working to make a form to make it easier for developers to understand our process and what to do step by step on accessing city resources, our policies, and the gap financing. But there is some education that needs to take place around affordability, how that's defined. So there's so many opportunities. And what I will say is, whatever, I don't know if you all have done much with Housing NOLA yet, we will pay them, just FYI, for any work they've done thus far. I think they did a logo for you all. I'm not sure what else. And even if they've given you all some sort of roadmap or framework that we still could move forward and build upon in some way, and we would pay them out for any of that at this point. So I just wanted to say that to not think we use them and now they've kicked us off and we leave them hanging. So
yeah, and to that point, there was a comment from one of the conversations. Do note, these are public meetings, so folks do watch at times, and sometimes the boring conversations. So did hear there was a comment made about, well, it shouldn't take an hour to decide on a logo. So, you know, I think some people may not have the patience for committee type work, which, you know, that is a part of that. So that was one of the critiques that have been thrown out there in terms of just the committee work that has to happen before you get to a final product. Without looking at the big picture, you can assume some things without actually, you know, looking at the full picture of everything that's out there. But just circling back thoughts and then coming these kind of two courses I've thrown out there. And again, if you all have different thoughts, feel free to throw them out there for us. But the two things I'm thinking is sending our thoughts forward and still trying to move forward, having some kind of dialogue, opening some conversation with the other groups that are out there.
Patrice, you mentioned that was...
Go ahead, John.
Sorry, Paul. So a couple of quick thoughts. Number one, I did have a question going back to I know we can't read the minds of council, but and we've talked about, we shouldn't be precluded from doing both, right? From both doing the process and developing projects as we go. But was there any, have you heard any sentiment that, or has anybody heard any sentiment that maybe we can't do both at the same time because of resource limitation, like staff time and that kind of thing? And related to that point, going forward, you know, we've mentioned that retaining housing NOLA would actually take some pressure off of staff, right? In terms of it would expand our capability, and that would be the whole idea of spending that $300,000. So you know, if we are going to communicate back to council, I think that's an important point to make, is that we're talking about, you know, everybody knows that cities, and Winston-Salem is not unique. Every city and every county in the state is facing a pretty severe staffing shortage in multiple departments. And so if that is a concern, then we need to address it, and also make the point that we could actually help relieve some of that pressure on staff by retaining housing NOLA. So that's one thing. The other point I'll make is, and because of who I work with and who I work for, we've talked about bringing groups in, and we've talked about what we would like to see developers do. But I think we need to engage developers in conversations, because quite frankly, we're in competition with every other city around for those affordable housing developers. You know, if High Point or Greensboro or Kernersville or anybody else, if they come up with a more attractive, let's just say, process or program, we're going to lose our affordable housing developers to those communities. So we really need to engage them and find out what they need. And I get what Patrice is saying. I mean, you know, sometimes people are going to come to the table with unreasonable requests, but we also need to figure out what's really going to move the needle with them.
Got it. And to the question of that, John, I have not heard the statement of lack of resource availability to be able to move forward on both. In my dialogue, that has not come up in the conversation. I'm not sure that other private conversation that I wasn't a part of, if that was a part of it or not. But
yeah, I haven't heard anything, but I was just curious to see if anybody else had.
Yeah, and I saw Paula, you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, my question was that, and it was to Patrice.
Well, look at the queue real quick, because I think Donna, you took yourself off mute too, and so after Paula, if you had a comment, go ahead and jump in after Paula.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, you mentioned that there was some expertise, or you mentioned that there might be expertise locally, or the thought that there is some expertise locally. Has anyone, is there an entity that's ready to stand in the gap that, you know, somehow we've overlooked?
I don't know about overlooked, Paula. I don't know. That's probably a Marla question, how the RFP was put out and scoped. And so obviously, whatever the scope was, housing NOLA ended up being the best option. I do know, obviously, the council is more prone to local. That is kind of a priority of the city in general to utilize local resources. We had several contracts simultaneously that relate to affordable housing. So housing NOLA contract was one. We had land banking with School of Government. There's a contract with School of Government's DFI. They do Development Finance Institute, I believe is what that stands for. And so we go to the School of Government for everything. They are local. We're really blessed to have a School of Government here in North Carolina that's so connected to local governments and the needs of local governments. Actually, myself, just for my own kind of knowledge, attended the Community Development Academy and just completed that about a week or two ago. So there's a wealth of knowledge in our state. Does not mean that the uniqueness of housing NOLA and what they were trying to offer as it relates to this kind of long-term planning process, community engagement, implementation strategy, things like that was not unique in why they won this bid. So are there potential opportunities locally? Yes. Could they do what Housing NOLA proposed to do? I can't say that for certain. So if we chose Housing NOLA, that means they were probably unique in what they were willing to offer, because they are a New Orleans-based entity. Having people know that, I think causes some level of heartburn, just to be honest about it. And why that didn't really kind of rise to a level of concern at the time, I'm not certain. But as people started questioning the so-called studies and research and things like that, the more information has come out about why Housing NOLA. And I know one council member is doing, I guess, their own level of research around Housing NOLA and looking at performance reports and what information has been put out. And so, and how that's interpreted, is kind of in the eyes of the beholder. So I don't think that, if we went in another direction, that we couldn't find someone to provide some contractual work. It wouldn't be $300,000, right? I mean, it's possible that you can have a consultant if necessary. If this is something you want, or if you all think through, this is the type of support we need that is outside of the capacity of our existing staff. Look at other options to consult and move the needle forward for this committee and in this space of affordable housing.
Donna?
Yes, Darren. I actually unraised my hand because John basically said what I was about to add. As far as content to the conversation, and it just appears that I guess council wants this project to go in a different direction. And I feel that the recommendation that you made as far as creating a letter and just an overview of what we're planning, what we have already done, and what we intend to do long term would be beneficial. And then if they, have any thoughts that we should do something different, what are they? What are those thoughts? What is the direction that you want us to go in, so that we won't have the back and forth? We can have clear guidance, and then we can take that information and move forward. But pretty much I was want to say what John actually provided.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then I know there's also the potential question around, whether or not, council members that are, passionate about this space, whether or not we invite them to, next meeting or so to come and engage and have a conversation. And I'm sure some would rather not do it publicly, and then some probably would be happy to have a public dialogue in reference to that. So I think that's a potential opportunity there as well for us. Somebody got to say something.
All I was going to say is, in terms of council meetings, I wouldn't be opposed. I mean, it would need to go, Marla would need to craft something. But if you wanted to present something, it would be for the General Government Community Development Committee. It would have to be in at the end of this month for the June agenda. And that's the last meeting they'll take a break in July. So I'm just throwing that out as also a possibility if the coalition wanted to be on the agenda, to just kind of present either an update or something that you wanted to kind of verbally state about the direction of the coalition, that you would have probably drafted in the letter as well. So just FYI.
Okay, other thoughts? So what I'll do is I will kind of try to pull together the thoughts I've heard here and put together a letter, send it out. We can workshop that as we need to. And then if we settle down on the language of that, then we can have something prepared to send to council. To the comment that Patrice made in reference to potentially maybe even have going before the council, is that any desire from the coalition to actually, I know there's a question about inviting members to come to the committee, unless it's public meeting, so they could all come if they wanted to, since it's already publicized. So But we can invite them here, or if we want to do something to potentially try to get on the community development agenda, is that something that folks have a desire to or would like to do in addition to sending a letter? I'll take the silence as maybe a not so much. And so, okay.
I think starting with the letter and laying those things out and seeing kind of direction we get, and if we are still unclear, maybe coming to one of those meetings would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, sounds like a good course. And then last thing, again, just circling back just about the having some conversation. Again, when I'm saying conversation, I'm not saying like the type of big dialogue we were talking about with the kickoff. I'm just saying, coalition members, as many as possible, inviting some of these groups to a roundtable kind of dialogue and discussion, understanding where they are, what they're working on, what we've been working on, what tension they see or don't see, and just facilitating some conversation there. Because again, based on my dialogue with other folks, I think that it'd be meaningful for us to engage with some of those groups, to have some conversation, just to see where there is alignment, where there's misunderstanding, and then where we could kind of collectively kind of maybe chart a course back towards the council, not just for the coalition itself, but for some of the groups that have been putting pressure on the council. I won't go by myself. Marla?
Is there a Folks for Good Housing meeting scheduled anytime soon that maybe you guys could be their guests and that be an opportunity to have some dialogue? Is it one of their meetings?
Paula?
There was just one scheduled this last week past. So if there is another one scheduled, it may be for another month. Unless it's a call meeting, which that could potentially happen.
Okay. If there was a meeting scheduled, how many people would be willing to come or participate?
Let me ask this, Derwin.
I'll be there.
Let me ask this, Derwin. I don't know if any of these folks that have been expressing these concerns to council are aware if the council is wanting to put a pause on this housing NOLA contract, but if so, if they are aware of it, would we be going into a meeting with the kind of credibility that we need to have in order to have a good conversation, good discussion about that?
Well, they're aware of it now, if they're because this is streaming. So and I'm probably a betting person that some of the folks probably watching the meeting. But in my opinion, I don't think that them pausing it impacts our credibility as much as it states that that the concerns have been heard, that they've raised concerns and those concerns have been heard. And oftentimes, as you may know, Paul, that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And so we've not, been necessarily, loud. We've just kind of been doing the work and kind of progressing forward. And so I think it'd be helpful to engage in the dialogue. That's what they're saying for me in terms of understanding what they see as concerns, because these groups, and again, I'm not putting it all on, Folks for Good Housing or Housing Justice. I think it's a collective of groups and people. But I think it'd be helpful to have some conversation. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm normally a person who say, well, if reasonable minds sit down at a table, you ought to be able to walk away with some better understanding. And so even if we don't agree, at least maybe we get a better understanding of where they're coming from. They get a better sense of what we've been working on, and then figure out, if there's opportunity alignment, if to the point, if some of those folks at the table say, hey, we have the group that could take on it, as Paula's question. Well, is there someone who could do X, Y, and Z? Well, we may learn in those conversations. Well, this person or this group has this capacity that we didn't know. And likewise, when it comes to our dialogue, that's just my thought. And like I said, in my conversations with some of the council members, I think they want to see some coalescing of minds and hearts out there in terms of these groups out there that may not be together. You know, how can you come together, and not necessarily on housing NOLA, but just how do we come together on a plan to make sure we're moving forward and the fire being lit around focusing on housing production.
I think Folks for Good Housing is open to a dialogue. At least that was my impression at the last meeting, a friendly dialogue.
I think that would be worth a try. I do just, I know we all know this because we've been part of the discussion, but I know after probably the first few months of us existing as a coalition, where we had these meetings and committee meetings and all that, where we were looking at all the different types of tools and techniques and organizational models of creating affordable housing. You know, we looked at many different things. We came to the conclusion that we needed some consulting help to do that there isn't presently the staff capacity to put together a robust implementation strategy. So that's what led us into the discussions that led to Housing NOLA. So I know we as a coalition have been advocating that for some time. So I hope in these conversations that we'll be able to kind of articulate why we think it's important to get this implementation strategy and this capacity building going, so that we can all get to that 750 unit a year goal.
Yeah. Okay.
And is that the 30 million, is that to meet that goal for this year, or is that a couple of years out? Is that just for this year?
No, it's not for just this year, but I mean, we have access to it. 10 million we need to really aggressively spend. Senator Lowe kind of advocated for that on the state level for us to have. And so it's on a time clock, because ARPA dollars, I think, need to be spent probably by 2026. So we really need a strategy to spend the 10 million. But we have
there's a commitment clock on that too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So at least committed or encumbered is probably the financial term. But yes, we need to go ahead. And there's some opportunities. Like I said, we just need a really sweet spot for what makes sense for us to support developers in building affordable housing.
If I did my math correctly, or if it even mattered, 35,000 into 30 million is about 857 doors. So if we are trying to do 750 a year, that leaves a little room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
but you need that 30 million every year if you're gonna do that. So that's one time.
Right. You need that every year.
We can do that in a year. I say we spend it. I think that would be where the city council is right now. We've got the money, we've got a need, we've got some land, we've got developers. Let's spend what we have and figure out going forward, how do we continue to leverage additional dollars or receive additional grant funding or whatever. ARPA just kind of landed in our lap. It was a one-time transformational opportunity for communities. And so we really need to move the needle in actually spending. It does no good for that money just to sit in our coffers when the need is here. So I think that's probably more or less where everyone is right now. Can you what is that saying? Pat your head and rub your tummy all at the same time while you're chewing gum. Yes, I don't know how effectively, and do we have the capacity to do everything? And the other thing is that, you know, this NOLA contract, yes, it has to be overseen by staff. You have to have the coalition to kind of implement the work. You all raised some great questions. What is our staff capacity to do so? I'll tell you that Marla and her team right now, that's all they're focused on is affordable housing. It is such an interest of the council to where all her work is directed into that space. And so, and there's a position she'll fill as well that supports that team. But we're really committed to making sure we kind of can move the needle. I know the mayor he's announced that 750. We need to do all that we can. And so, Paul, if we spend all 30 million by the end of this year, so be it. That means more people will be in affordable housing that weren't last week, right? So I'm not that concerned. I think if there's some opportunities that we can actually provide gap financing for developers to move the needle on this, I think that's okay. And that's what we're hearing, that's the desire. So I'm done.
Got it. And just to note, for just coalition members, also just that Marla did send a email to us with some information around just housing production report that I was just looking over. Good information, good numbers. Actually shows a lot of good work in progress that staff is doing now, and has a lot of projects and doors in the work, which doesn't help. In my opinion, don't help the argument of Paul's, but we're not at that. It looks like good progress is moving forward towards meeting that the goal. And I think it's just some more conversation around, well, how do we amp that up? I guess may be the question, because if those numbers are as they are, then we seem to be moving in a positive direction on that. So we'll take. I've heard marching orders from here. Everybody's good on for us to kind of put the thoughts together in a letter, get that back out to folks. Still reach out, try to see if conversations can happen with some groups and see who all may be interested in being able to get that together. And then kind of wait to see what response we get back from council in reference to our letter, kind of how their thoughts on that. And then hopefully we'll have some better understanding of kind of what our marching orders are and direction will be from the council moving forward. It sound like a plan from the group. Patricia, you're gonna say something?
Yes, and I promise you I'm done. I just want to note that typically, and I'm not saying in every case, and I'm not sure prior you got direction from the council. Typically it's generated, or recommendations rise up from staff based on the support they need to move a certain issue, project, plan forward, right? And so council likes to hear recommendations. They can give you more feedback on a recommendation versus any intent that you think you're going to send a letter and then they say, oh, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. You might hear some of that. Well, first of all, if it's public comment time, you won't get any back and forth. That's not the intent. But I'm just throwing that out there just to consider. It may not be in that direct, this is what we need you to do. Kind of whatever your charter is as a coalition, remains. And if there any modification of that, yes, council would need to decide upon. But they want to hear recommendations, they want to hear feedback, they will vote yay or nay on a certain issue. I think using a contracted outside consultant like Housing NOLA, that they can decide on those types of things. And right now they just weren't filling that contract, or at least pausing it in some way. But doesn't mean that you hang your hat all on one entity like a housing NOLA to inform the work, because most committees honestly just don't have that, and or the resources or a consultant to guide or inform the work. It usually kind of comes from a staff level or from the members itself to say this is how we should kind of move forward. So I know, and this is a tricky space and you need support to inform kind of how you move forward, but I wouldn't hang my hat on it totally. And if any way that it can, or through the support of Marla or Tanya Skillman that's on her team, can assist with crafting kind of a scope or a way forward as you recalibrate or rethink next steps, to get that from them. And then maybe you then present that to council in a package that they can then see and weigh in on the idea. And that's just my opinion / 2 cents of what I've seen happen in other coalitions and committees and boards and commissions at the city.
Yeah, I think you're right, Patrice, in reference to that. The council does kind of operate off of the recommendation pieces of things. But I would say also, if I was talking to council, we made recommendation and they approved the recommendation, and then now they're changing it. So that would be more the sense of like, well, this is what we told you we needed, and we still need to do these things. Well, how do we, if they're saying pause, then I guess in that scenario, then we're left to figure out the how, and then recommend back to them how we would see it kind of facilitating forward. Publicly, I would say that's not fair to the coalition. I would just honestly say I don't think that's fair to the coalition. And so I think the first part of it is kind of maybe sharing the thoughts. And I think there is, and like I threw out some ways that we could be involved in that kind of thing. I think that's kind of twofold in the sense of, hey, this is kind of how we're feeling about what you're doing. And then the follow-up of, well, this may be, these are some thoughts on how we could move forward. Because I think it is important for the council to hear the sentiment of the folks that are serving at their pleasure on the coalition. Hey, this, we don't really understand it. These things don't necessarily make sense. This is why we made these decisions. This may be the course you want to go, but we want to tell you how we feel. And then these may be some things that, we can work on and continue to work in forward as we move forward. On some stuff, but to Patrice's point, she is right. Council normally does operate, more off of the here's some recommendations of things, and not necessarily a group dialogue with committees and coalitions on, hey, this is what we want you to do. But the dynamic here does seem to be just a little bit different, and maybe there's some additional conversations that are not full-fledged group meetings, but we can try to figure out if we can't get down to just some more specifics. But you're right there. You are right there. So cool. All right. Publicly, I want to say thank you to Marla. Thank you for the hard work that you've been doing in leading this work, helping support the Affordable Housing Coalition. I think that your competency in work in this space has been invaluable to us as we continue to work for it. So I just want to say publicly thank you for your work and everything that you've been doing.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Yeah. Any other comments from the coalition? Okay. Well, I appreciate you all sacrificing this unplanned meeting on your Friday. I dislike Friday meetings anyway, but hey, we appreciate you. It's an important conversation, important dialogue for us to have, and just look out for some correspondence as we move forward. And again, Patrice, I'm sorry. It'd be what T-bone steak, whatever.
I will say, I wouldn't have known that you were put on the spot. You facilitated the conversation very well, and I think it was really helpful for us to be able to understand the dynamics of things. So thank you to you as well.
Thank you all.
Okay. All right. With that, I just want to make sure that there weren't anything else in these comments here for us. Okay. Cool. All right. With that, appreciate you all. You have a good rest of your Friday.
All right. You too. Bye.
Take care.